Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Alpine Odyssey. We are here behind the railroad station that we completed last episode, and we are kind of touching up this backstage area just to give the passengers something to look at as they make this large loop around, pulling into the station. It felt like it was kind of an incomplete section, and as we've been going through Alpine Odyssey over the past few months at this point, you know that I like to kind of build one section and then move on directly into the next, kind of one at a time. So this is kind of sealing off this northern, I guess, tip of the map. Eventually there might be an access road for some vehicles and things running near here, but for now we're just going to be starting off with some train sheds. Now this is kind of a simple build in theory. You know, we're gonna have this nice normal brick kind of backdrop. We are then going to build arches, kind of going along the side. Each of these archways will contain a window of some sort eventually. And of course, we need to make sure these windows kind of fit the general arch theme here. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is use a arch doorway to give your windows that shape. And then you can simply put another window inside of it to go ahead and give you that full kind of half moon that you're looking for there. We're also going to be using the fairy tale door. I noticed, at least in my reference picture that I was using for one of these kind of rail yard sheds, is there are multiple entrances into the building. You know, these are kind of workshop areas where they might work on a train, might stow it if there is, say, some poor weather. And these side entrances are generally fairly large because you might want to get equipment in here, and it's not like you can really use the front gate for everything. Here we are trying to work out, you know, maybe I could possibly get a train station in here so that, you know, things might actually, I guess, be a little bit more properly to scale. However, I think due to the collision of the station onto the railway, we just couldn't get that thing to line up, which is kind of a shame. I think it would have been a really cool thing to do, is to actually have some parked trains in here, so it's visually interesting, and this might be something we come back to. In fact, none of the interior on these buildings are really done. Now, the cool thing about this is that it's almost reminiscent of a cathedral in a sense. So you're going to have this main center aisle that is higher than everything else. And then it's going to have these wings going along the side. The center aisle, of course, is kind of where the trains are most of the time. And then the wings are, you know, where you might keep your workbenches, your tools, and other things to assist working on the engines. So, you know, for me, very church-like structure. It's just kind of missing the apse and nave and, you know, the spire, you could say, and bell towers. But other than that, it is the core of a classic cathedral. So moving on from there, we have our upper windows installed. They are slightly smaller. And then up on the raised section, what I'll call the clerestory, because that's what it would be on a church, is kind of these ventilation windows. Now currently I have these ones open, and you know, you can kind of open and close them, I guess, probably depending on the weather and what's going on out there. But it's kind of nice to have these open to begin with, just because you can see into the building a little bit. You know, most buildings here in Alpine Odyssey, you can't really see into them that well, and doing this, I think, is going to help it read from a distance. And if we do end up during a live stream going in detailing out the interior of here, if you guys want that to happen, it could look cool as well, because as you know, Planet Coaster, we view things from a fairly high and steep angle. So if you can get a little bit of a viewpoint in there, that's always nice to do. We have raised up the front doorways here, made them much taller. We are now adding these pretty cool kind of barn style doors to the front. They're not quite wide enough to actually fully close, so we have to add a little bit of an extra wood piece on one door, then the other. That way it looks like it might overlap. And then the upper section of the archway we're going to leave as kind of a framework to a window, or what would be kind of this window pane across there. Now, I assume that window pane might, you know, be added or needed or removed depending on what kind of engine you have going into this thing. But the train for the ride itself is actually not that tall. So, you know, for now, I think it's fine to have them as a window rather than part of the doorway itself. Here, we got to make sure to try and get the tracks as central onto the building as possible. It can be a little troublesome when you kind of pre-lay out your tracks without knowing exactly what is going to go near them. We are using, of course, the fence that we have surrounding the kind of front area of the park, dividing that, from unwanted guests to the train stations there. So we will eventually kind of wrap the backstage around behind those buildings. And once we get to that point, I think it'll be pretty cool. Over here by the train track, I felt like, having 2 buildings is great, but why not have a third? And this is actually surprisingly one of the more time-consuming buildings of this episode, or sections of this episode. The train kind of storage shed is a little bit more straightforward and simple. This is what I believe to be the Switchmaster's kind of post, the person actually controlling the switches of the tracks and things like that. Now, this rail yard is probably too small to really require this, in my opinion. You would think the conductor could just get out and switch something when he needs to and then hop back into the train and off he goes. But I just wanted that third extra building, like I said, in here. And plus, these little things do look pretty cool. A lot of them are kind of asymmetrical in nature, so they're going to have a stone foundation, as you can see down there. And the upper part kind of sits off the foundation, kind of closer to the rail. It's high enough to where it's not interfering with the cars or anything like that, but it's kind of more centralized into the rail, probably to give a better view angle along the sides, and then also so that they can see exactly where those switches are lining up a little bit better. Of course, the upper section is kind of surrounded all with windows, and due to the slightly awkward size of this upper box, we have to make a custom roof, which we then have to kind of hide the overlapping sections of this peak that we have going on with this raised center column. Now, it does look a little janky. So, here, going through the design process of trying to find out, 1, how tall does it really need to be? Because you want to kind of get away with the bare minimum in cases like this. And then 2, maybe change the roof line a little bit. So, instead of just being a nice, perfectly square section here, we will be using more of a 60-degree angle just going up the side there, and that way it gets a little bit more dynamic as the higher up you go, and just that much more interesting than most of these buildings. Now, copy and paste, of course, since this is a perfectly square building, we can simply copy a quarter of it with the roof tile, and then copy it all the way around, and there you have it. That is a nice little topper for this little structure. Now, I do like the use of wood along a lot of the framework here, and these heavy beams at the bottom makes it feel very secure, and the thinner beams kind of going along the windows and things make them really look like they're part of the building. We need a lower door here with, of course, some windows. We're going to be running some windows along the little bit extra of the foundation as well. A kind of rough, flat roof on the lower foundational section, and we'll try and see if we can't put a door up here, because you would think the staircase would be inside. However, for room's sake, I think it would be better to use the shape of the building to its benefit, so we can get possibly the staircase on the exterior. Also, part of this building is, of course, stone foundation all the way to the ground. The other bit of it is kind of supported by these wooden beams. For the exterior staircase, I wanted to try and, kind of take the lazy way out a little bit here and potentially use a metal staircase. And then, thinking about kind of larger blocks that we can use for staircases, trying this kind of wooden balcony element, that really wasn't working out. And so we went ahead with this brick kind of element. Now, when you dye it kind of dark enough, it doesn't really look too much like brick. It can either look kind of like wood in itself, or just another kind of metal-esque material going up there. And generally, I think that's the width and the length of the staircase that I kind of wanted. And no real complaints there. Of course, it's going to need a railing going up the side, and then of course we'll have to kind of build that along the upper. I guess it's a balcony considered at this point. It's not so much a roof anymore. It is more of an access point. which is pretty cool how buildings kind of evolve and I guess change form and the more you work on it. You know, it was originally just a flat roof and now it is a access point. Here we go. We are now going to go into the rest of the episode. And this is, well, a lot of stuff I ended up cutting out later on. But what I want to do is, one, try and get the flow of water kind of from these upper areas playing a little bit better into our streams going in here. So we're making these kind of runoff areas where water probably naturally just runs off quickly and clears these little peninsulas and shorelines, making them a little bit more of a gentle transition rather than this super steep cliff edge along the shoreline there. And we'll go ahead and after that we go in with some dirt all along the tracks themselves, because you know that's kind of the most worn spot, but also the spot that is mostly blocking the sunlight here in this area is the actual train tracks themselves. I was thinking about adding some more of these wooden bridgeways, you know, over the water there. However, I feel like those heavier set bridges are more suited for the station itself, because the station is pretty heavy. Everything else is kind of lighter, so I'm fine with having those thinner support beams going along there. Here, working on the edge of the station, making sure this kind of blends and comes to a stop kind of completely, spacing out some columns that we can eventually use as corner posts for a railing, just to make sure, you know, people are safe along this whole section. You don't want any mishaps, especially along a drop into water like this. And nice wooden solid rail going across here that hopefully look pretty cool. We get to use the a new type of item. Well, it's not a new item, it's a wooden support, and I'm going to be using it a little bit like a planter because it has that kind of square top there, and I think that turned out pretty cool along there. I didn't want any tall trees next to this building. I wanted it to be more open, just because there are going to be people potentially, in theory, they would be standing over here kind of waiting for the train to come by. I might throw a bench in this section, eventually possibly a vending machine, just because I do like having those little details. And then here we go, spending a lot of time laying down clusters of rocks. I lay these in clusters that kind of fade out near the edges. I think that's kind of, at least for me, what works best when laying out large sections of stone. We're not going to cover all the landscaping done in this episode, just because to me, it's a little bit of the most boring parts of playing Planet Coaster, and probably the most boring parts to watch. So this episode is going to be a little bit shorter because of that. However, landscaping is super important. Just to tie everything together, it fills in a lot of these dead spaces, and if you have any areas where you might think you're lacking detail, this is kind of a quick way to add some of that. So, you know, trees, shrubs, bushes, you can hide mistake areas, and just make sure that your I guess lively greens are in areas where they might actually be growing. I don't want anything in those valleys there, just because I figure that's where most of the water is going to be running off, and everything else is trying not to block those back structures too much. You don't want to try and hide your sight lines when you are doing these type of things. More brushwork along the edge there. You know, really dense kind of lower grassy areas I think work really well in Planet Coaster. So this is it for today's speed build. Let's go ahead into real time. You guys can give me your feedback, and here we go. Alright, so here we are taking a look at the back of the train station here at the wonderful bits of greenery and doodads, just kind of filling in the overall, I guess, area, and also just making it feel, I guess, a little bit more lived in, believable, and I guess beautiful, you could say. Back here, we have just a whole bunch of raised track. Not because I guess necessarily we needed to raise it up, but I think it was just easier to keep everything the exact same level. So we may end up, you know, raising the terrain in sections just to make it fit exactly. But I also do enjoy the fact that the track is raised, because you do get areas where, you know, some greenery can grow underneath of it. And raising up the track like this, especially since there's a lot of wood underneath of it, might prevent a lot of the wood from rotting. Untreated wood, especially when it looks like this, looks like it would rot pretty easily. So the fact that it is raised up means only these poles are touching the ground, and I think that would be better than everything touching the ground at once. Other than that, here is our little switch station, and it is overlooking the track quite nicely. I love the little wooden post on one side, the fact that it's pretty asymmetrical with a whole bunch of windows to give a great amount of sightline here. Little back staircase up to the kind of command post, you could say, and a whole bunch of green just going along the tracks, filling in this space, making it look a little bit better. You want kind of patches of greenery kind of in these areas. It makes the whole thing work, and then if you add texture underneath that, you kind of get a nice build from 2D to 3D back to 2D again, and kind of makes things pop up on their own. Back here, we kind of have a hard edge. I am going to eventually run a road back here, because eventually we need to run a utility kind of section and roadway back into this area to get into the backstage of these sections of the park. So I think that will look pretty good, and we might be able to add a fence and things, and of course more trees to help separate the areas. Here are the larger buildings that we made this episode. I closed one door just to keep it, I guess, a little bit more dynamic than having all four open all the time. Very simple kind of building here. We have our kind of central aisle where the train tracks actually go into. The side sections, more workshop storage sections, and a nice row of windows going along the whole length, and some more upper ventilation things. Might also help keep the buildings cool if the upper areas open and the front doors open. You're going to get a nice kind of circulation of air. So that's a pretty cool bonus there. Other than that, we get our railing. We get some additional trees. Worked a little bit on the connecting plaza here in between these two areas, just to make sure this kind of seals off. We can bring in supplies from the backstage area to the front stage through this door here, and just whole access ways into the European section. There's still plenty of gardening to do, but to me it's kind of a more of a minor detail that we're going to be doing, and I think that's about it. Yeah, looks like that is about it this episode. So what we're going to be doing here this Sunday, we are going to be working on the coaster layout live. So what I want is, you guys to help me build this thing, because I'm terrible at coasters and designing them. So this whole area is kind of reserved for our first coaster. It's going to be a wooden coaster, and it is going to kind of just follow the natural terrain of things. Nothing too fancy in there. There's no going to be inversions or anything. It's not a hybrid coaster by any means. And I just want a nice, somewhat gentle, but still exciting of a ride in this whole area here. We're going to build a cool windmill to be kind of the main weenie up on top of this plane here, and then everything else will be kind of just European countryside, I think, farmlands, and I hope that works out well. It just kind of matches the whole countryside train station that we have going here, and makes the whole city kind of blend back into nature, and hopefully will balance everything else out in this whole area. So if you're excited about that, we will be streaming again on Sundays, 11:30 Eastern Time, give or take a few minutes. We might even start early, depending on if I'm awake. Other than that, this episode is over. If you guys enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe if you're new. Go ahead and leave a like down below on basically voting to see if you guys want to see more Planet Coaster. Also, go ahead and leave a comment for your feedback. So until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.